How do you get a scammer to expose their own con in writing? The letter from Morgan Stanley arrived on a Wednesday in March, and I remember staring at it for a full minute before my brain would process what it meant. It was addressed to me at my apartment, marked, important account information, and the first line read, "We're reaching out regarding your investment account ending in 8,421, which shows no activity or balance in our system." I didn't have an account ending in 8,421. My investment account with my financial advisor Trevor Kaufman ended in 3,357, and according to the statements he sent me every quarter, it had $287,000 in it. My inheritance from my grandmother, carefully growing over 3 years through Trevor's expert management. Except apparently Morgan Stanley had never heard of it. My hands started shaking before I'd finished reading the second paragraph. They were conducting routine outreach to inactive accounts and wanted to confirm whether I still wished to maintain the relationship. The account had been opened in my name in 2019 with an initial deposit of $5,000, then sat dormant ever since. No other deposits, no investments, no activity. Which meant the $287,000 I thought I had didn't exist. Which meant Trevor had been lying to me for 3 years. Which meant I was about to lose my mind in my kitchen while holding a piece of paper that had just blown up my entire financial future. I'd been working as a project manager at a tech company for 6 years when my grandmother died and left me $200,000. It was October 2020, and I was 29 years old, living in a rental apartment, trying to figure out how to be smart with money I'd never had before. My parents had both died in a car accident when I was in college, so Grandma Helen had been my only family for the last decade. She'd raised me after they died, put me through school on her teacher's pension, never complained about the financial burden. The inheritance was a complete surprise. I'd known she owned her house, but I had no idea she'd been investing her money so carefully all those years. When the estate lawyer handed me the check, I felt overwhelmed and terrified in equal measure. I didn't want to waste the gift she'd given me by making stupid choices. That's when my coworker Liz recommended her financial advisor. She'd been using Trevor Kaufman for 5 years and raved about his results. He'd helped her double her retirement savings, she said. He specialized in working with young professionals who wanted to build wealth responsibly. He had an office in a nice building downtown, worked with a boutique firm called Kaufman Wealth Management, and charged a flat annual fee rather than commissions, which apparently meant his advice was more objective. Liz introduced us at a happy hour in early November, and Trevor seemed perfect. He was in his mid-40s, professionally dressed, spoke confidently about market strategies and long-term growth. He asked good questions about my goals and risk tolerance, explained concepts clearly without being condescending, and made me feel like my financial future was in capable hands. Our first official meeting was in his office 2 weeks later. The space was small but well-appointed. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls covered with framed certifications and awards. Certified financial planner, he told me, plus credentials from something called the Financial Planning Association. He'd been managing investments for 12 years and had 43 clients, mostly professionals in their 30s and 40s looking to build wealth for retirement or major life purchases. I filled out paperwork, signed agreements, wrote him a check for $200,000, and felt relieved to have an expert handling it. He recommended a diversified portfolio, 60% stocks, 30% bonds, 10% alternative investments. Conservative but with good growth potential, he explained. He'd send me quarterly statements showing my balance and returns, plus an annual summary for tax purposes. His fee was 1% of assets under management annually, so $2,000 the first year. Seemed reasonable for professional guidance. I left his office feeling like a responsible adult who was making smart choices with her grandmother's gift. For the next 3 years, I received statements every quarter showing steady growth. By March 2021, my account showed $218,000. By December 2021, $241,000. The pandemic market recovery, Trevor explained in his cover letters. By September 2022, $268,000. I was thrilled. I'd check the statements carefully, see the list of stocks and bonds and mutual funds, see the gains and losses itemized professionally, and feel grateful that Trevor was managing this for me. I met with him twice a year for reviews where he'd walk me through performance and recommend adjustments. He always seemed knowledgeable and confident, never pushy. I trusted him completely. Then came March 2023 and the letter from Morgan Stanley. I sat at my kitchen table and forced myself to read it 3 times, hoping I was misunderstanding something. But the message was clear. The account in my name at Morgan Stanley had been opened with $5,000 3 years ago and hadn't been touched since. Which meant either this letter was a mistake or Trevor had been sending me fake statements for 3 years while my money disappeared somewhere I couldn't track. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder where I kept all his quarterly reports. Looked at the most recent one from December 2022, showing a balance of $287,634. The letterhead said Kaufman Wealth Management, with an address downtown and a phone number. The statement listed dozens of holdings, shares of Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, various mutual funds, bonds, performance charts, professional formatting. It looked completely legitimate, but apparently it was all fiction. I called the phone number on Morgan Stanley's letter and got connected to a customer service representative named Donna. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, that I'd received their letter about an inactive account, but I thought my money was actively invested. Could she help me understand what was happening? Donna pulled up my account and confirmed that yes, it showed only the initial $5,000 deposit from November 2020 and zero activity since then. No additional deposits, no trades, no investments. Was I working with a financial advisor? Yes, Trevor Kaufman. He should have been managing the account. Donna paused. She asked me to hold while she checked something. When she came back on the line, her voice had changed. More careful. Ma'am, I'm not seeing any advisor relationship linked to your account. There's no record of a Trevor Kaufman having authorization to manage your investments here. Are you sure he's affiliated with Morgan Stanley? My stomach dropped. He gave me paperwork. I signed forms. I wrote him a check for $200,000. Another pause. I'm going to transfer you to our fraud prevention department. Can you hold? I held. Got transferred to a man named Derek who asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I told him about meeting Trevor, opening the account, writing the check, receiving quarterly statements. Derek asked me to email him copies of everything I had, the statements, the forms I'd signed, anything with Trevor's name on it. He said they'd investigate, but I should also file a police report immediately. If money had been transferred under false pretenses, that was theft. I thanked him and hung up, then immediately called Trevor's office number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Professional recording, his voice calm and reassuring. You've reached Trevor Kaufman at Kaufman Wealth Management. I'm currently with clients, but will return your call within 24 hours. Please leave a message. I didn't. I texted him instead. Trevor, I need to speak with you urgently about my account. Please call me as soon as possible. Then I pulled up every piece of paperwork I had from him and started taking photos with my phone. The original investment agreement from November 2020. The quarterly statements showing steady growth. The fee invoices I'd paid annually. Everything. I called Liz and asked if she'd heard from Trevor recently. Had she gotten her quarterly statement? She said yes, just last week. Everything looked fine. Why? I explained about the Morgan Stanley letter and the fraud department and the discrepancy between what Trevor's statements showed and what the actual bank said. Liz went quiet. Then she said she'd call me back. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Liz, and she sounded shaken. I just called Morgan Stanley. They said the same thing to me. My account shows the initial deposit from 5 years ago and nothing else. No activity, no investments, nothing. We compared numbers. Liz had started with $50,000 and her latest statement showed $89,000 after 5 years of supposed growth and additional deposits. But Morgan Stanley said her account showed only $7,000, the amount she'd deposited in 2018, sitting in cash earning minimal interest. We'd both been scammed. Trevor had been sending us fake statements while our money went somewhere else. Liz started crying on the phone. That $50,000 was her entire emergency fund plus savings. She'd been adding to it every year thinking she was building her retirement. I told her to call the fraud department too, to file a police report, to do everything Derek had told me to do. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to breathe normally. $200,000 gone. 3 years of supposed investing erased. My grandmother's inheritance stolen by someone I'd trusted with one of the most important assets of my life. Then I got angry. Really angry. The kind of anger that clears your head and sharpens your focus instead of making you emotional. Trevor had scammed me because he thought I was naive and wouldn't check his work. He'd counted on my trust and my ignorance about how investment accounts actually operated. But I was a project manager at a tech company, and my job was solving complex problems systematically, so I was going to solve this one. First, I needed evidence. Specifically, I needed Trevor to document his own fraud in writing. Because right now, all I had were fake statements and a missing $200,000. I needed him to explain in his own words where my money went and how his scheme worked. I needed him to incriminate himself thoroughly enough that no lawyer could defend it. I opened my email and drafted a message to Trevor. The key was to sound confused rather than accusatory, naive rather than suspicious. I needed him to think I was a mark he could still manipulate, because people explain things to people they think are stupid. They document their lies when they believe you won't understand enough to use those documents against them. I wrote, "Hi Trevor, I received a strange letter from Morgan Stanley today saying they have an inactive account in my name. I'm confused because I thought you were actively managing my investments through them. The letter references account 8421, which isn't the number on my statements from you. Can you help me understand what this means? I tried calling but got your voicemail. I'm sure this is just some administrative confusion, but I'd appreciate clarity. Thanks, Jenna." I read it 3 times before sending. Perfectly innocent, perfectly confused. The kind of email that would make him think he could talk his way out of this with a plausible explanation. I hit send at 3:47 p.m. and waited. By 8:30 p.m., he hadn't responded to my email or my earlier text. I tried calling again. Voicemail. I left a message this time, keeping my voice concerned rather than angry. "Trevor, it's Jenna. I really need to talk to you about my account. I got a confusing letter from Morgan Stanley, and I'm sure you can explain, but I'm a little worried. Can you please call me tonight?" He didn't. Thursday morning. Still no response. I called Derek at Morgan Stanley's fraud department and told him Trevor wasn't returning my calls or emails. Derek said that wasn't surprising. Once scammers realized they'd been caught, they typically went silent or tried to flee. He asked if I'd filed a police report yet. I said I was planning to do that today. He told me to bring all the documentation I had and to mention his name. Morgan Stanley would cooperate fully with any investigation. I called the police non-emergency line and explained I needed to report investment fraud. They directed me to come to the station and speak with the financial crimes unit. I took a personal day from work and drove downtown to the police station, bringing a folder with printed copies of everything. Trevor's statements, the Morgan Stanley letter, my original investment agreement, the fee invoices, email correspondence. The detective who met with me was named Robert Gaines, mid-50s with tired eyes and a patient demeanor. He listened to my whole story, took notes, asked clarifying questions. When I finished, he told me this was sadly common. Investment fraud was hard to catch because victims often didn't realize they'd been scammed until years later. The statements looked legitimate, the advisor seemed credible, and people assumed the system had safeguards that would prevent this kind of thing. But solo practitioners like Trevor operated in a gray area where they could create fake credentials and fake statements without much oversight, especially if they kept their client pool small enough to avoid attention. Detective Gaines took copies of all my documents and said he'd open an investigation. He warned me that recovering the money would be difficult. If Trevor had spent it, gambled it, or moved it offshore, I might never see it again even if he was prosecuted. But documenting the fraud was important for building a criminal case. After leaving the police station, I drove to Trevor's office. It was in a mid-rise building downtown, the kind of generic professional space that could house lawyers or accountants or financial advisors. Suite 815. I took the elevator up and found the suite number on a door with frosted glass. Kaufman Wealth Management was printed on the glass in gold lettering. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. No answer. I cupped my hands against the glass and peered through. The office looked empty. No lights on, no movement. I took photos of the door and the suite number, then went back downstairs to the building management office. The woman at the front desk was professionally friendly. I explained I was trying to reach my financial advisor in suite 815, but the office seemed empty. Did she know if Trevor Kaufman still leased that space? She checked her computer. Mr. Kaufman's lease ended last month. He didn't renew. My heart sank. Did he leave a forwarding address? I'm not authorized to share that information, but I can tell you we don't have one on file. Of course not. He'd vanished. I thanked her and left, feeling the situation slipping further out of reach. Trevor had closed his office and disappeared, probably because he knew his scam was about to unravel. By Thursday evening, I still hadn't heard from him. I sent another email, this one slightly more urgent. Trevor, I'm getting very concerned about not hearing from you. The situation with Morgan Stanley is confusing, and I need your help understanding what's happening with my account. Please respond or call me. This is urgent. No response. Friday morning, Detective Gaines called. He'd tried to contact Trevor at the office address and phone number I'd provided, but both were disconnected. He'd run Trevor's information through various databases and found something interesting. Trevor Kaufman wasn't licensed as a financial advisor with any regulatory body. No CFP certification, no registration with the SEC or FINRA. The credentials on his wall were fake. He was a con artist who'd created a legitimate-looking operation to steal from people who trusted him. I called Liz and told her what the detective had found. She'd filed her own police report and met with Detective Gaines too. We compared notes about what we knew. Trevor had targeted young professionals through personal referrals, using social connections to build trust. He'd kept his client pool small to avoid scrutiny. He'd sent professional-looking statements to maintain the illusion. And now he'd disappeared with our money. Liz asked what we could do. I told her I had an idea, but I needed to think through it carefully. That weekend, I researched everything I could about investment fraud prosecution. The biggest challenge was documentation. To prove someone committed fraud, you needed evidence that they intentionally deceived you to steal your money. My fake statements weren't enough because Trevor could claim they were honest mistakes or misunderstandings. I needed him to explain his scheme in writing, to describe in his own words how he'd taken my money and what he'd done with it. People who think they're smarter than their victims love to explain their schemes. They love to justify their actions and demonstrate their cleverness. I just needed to give Trevor a reason to do that where I could document it. Monday morning, I created a new email address using a fake name, rachel.portman.consulting@gmail. Then I drafted an email from Rachel Portman to Trevor's email address, the one he'd been using for client communication. The email read, Mr. Kaufman, I'm reaching out regarding representation for your current legal situation. I'm a legal consultant who specializes in helping financial professionals navigate regulatory investigations and client disputes. I understand you may be dealing with complaints from former clients who don't understand how investment management works. I've successfully helped numerous advisors resolve these situations favorably. If you're interested in discussing your options, I'd be happy to schedule a confidential consultation. These matters can often be resolved through proper documentation and communication. Best regards, Rachel Portman, JD. It was risky. If Trevor was smart, he'd ignore it or recognize it as a trap. But con artists have egos. They believe they can manipulate any situation, and the promise of a lawyer who could make his problems go away might be too tempting to resist. I sent the email at 9:14 a.m. and waited. By 3:30 p.m., I had a response. Trevor had taken the bait. His email read, "Rachel, thank you for reaching out. I am indeed dealing with some misunderstandings with a few clients who don't comprehend the complexities of investment management during volatile market conditions. I'd be interested in discussing how you could help resolve these issues. My primary concern is protecting my professional reputation while ensuring clients understand that losses are sometimes unavoidable in investing. When would be convenient for a call? Trevor Kaufman." I read his email 5 times, feeling satisfaction build with each reading. He'd just documented in writing that he had multiple clients complaining, that there were losses in their accounts, and that he was worried about his reputation. That was a start. But I needed more. I needed him to explain what actually happened to the money. I responded as Rachel. "Trevor, I appreciate your prompt response. Before we schedule a call, it would be helpful if you could provide some background on the specific complaints. What are clients alleging, and what's your understanding of the discrepancies?" In my experience, these situations often arise from miscommunications about investment strategies or documentation issues. The more details you can provide, the better I can assess how to help. Feel free to be candid. Our conversation is confidential. I sent it and waited. This was the critical moment. If Trevor was suspicious, he'd back off or insist on a phone call. But if his ego was big enough and his desperation was real enough, he might explain everything in writing to this lawyer who promised to help him. Wednesday morning, Trevor responded. The email was longer this time, and as I read it, my hands started shaking from adrenaline. He'd written, "Rachel, the situation is somewhat complicated. I managed investments for approximately 20 clients over 3 years, mostly young professionals who lacked sophisticated financial knowledge. I provided them with quarterly statements showing portfolio performance, but the actual underlying structure was more complex than traditional brokerage accounts. Some clients are now questioning why their statements from me don't match records from Morgan Stanley or other institutions. The issue is that I was managing investments through a proprietary system that consolidated holdings across multiple platforms for tax efficiency. The statements I provided reflected the overall portfolio value, but individual brokerage accounts might show different numbers because they only captured portions of the total holdings. I'm confident I can explain this to any regulator who understands advanced investment structures, but I'm concerned that unsophisticated clients are making allegations without understanding how the system worked. Additionally, I did experience some losses in 2022 during the market downturn that I absorbed personally rather than immediately reflecting them in client statements, intending to recover the losses through subsequent performance. Some clients are now claiming fraud because they don't see their full balances, but that's simply a timing issue related to my attempt to protect them from short-term volatility. I need legal guidance on how to present this situation properly. I read the email 3 times, barely able to believe what I was seeing. Trevor had just admitted in writing to fabricating statements, concealing losses, and deceiving multiple clients. He'd documented his own fraud while thinking he was explaining innocent miscommunication to a lawyer. This was exactly what I needed. I forwarded the email immediately to Detective Gaines with a note. "Detective, I created a fake persona pretending to be a lawyer to get Trevor to explain his scheme. He just sent this email admitting to creating false statements and concealing losses from approximately 20 clients. Can this be used as evidence?" Detective Gaines called me within an hour. His tone was surprised and impressed. "Miss Reynolds. That's quite clever investigative work. Yes, this email is absolutely usable. He documented intent to deceive, acknowledged multiple victims, and described his method. This is great evidence for prosecution." He paused. "Though I should mention that impersonating a lawyer could technically be problematic. Don't continue this deception beyond what you've already done. But the email he sent is admissible because he voluntarily disclosed the information without coercion. He said he'd use this to get a warrant for Trevor's financial records and potentially arrest him if they could locate him. He asked me to forward any other communication from Trevor. I agreed and hung up, feeling victorious. But I wasn't done yet. I responded to Trevor as Rachel. "Trevor, thank you for that detailed explanation. I understand the complexity of the situation. To properly represent you, I'll need to understand the full scope. You mentioned absorbing losses personally, approximately how much in client funds were affected. And when you say you managed investments through a proprietary system, does that mean client money was held in accounts under your control rather than directly in their names at traditional brokerages? Also, where are client funds currently held? Understanding the actual location of assets will be important for documentation purposes." I was pushing harder now, asking questions that would force Trevor to reveal more specifics about his scheme. If he answered, I'd have even more detailed documentation of the fraud. Thursday morning, Trevor responded again. He was clearly desperate for help and not thinking carefully about what he was revealing. "Rachel, the total portfolio I managed was approximately $3.2 million across all clients. Most of that was held in a business account under Kaufman Wealth Management for consolidated management. After the 2022 losses, the current liquid assets are approximately $800,000. The remainder was lost through a combination of market performance and operating expenses. Specifically, I invested heavily in some high-risk opportunities that didn't perform as expected, And I also used portions of client funds for business development and personal expenses during the pandemic when my income was reduced. I realized this wasn't ideal, but I intended to replenish the funds through subsequent investment performance. Now that several clients are questioning their balances simultaneously, I'm concerned about a cascade effect where everyone demands immediate withdrawals that I can't fulfill. I need guidance on how to manage this situation without triggering criminal investigations. Can you help with that? I stared at the email in disbelief. Trevor had just confessed in writing to stealing $2.4 million from his clients. He'd admitted using client funds for personal expenses. He'd acknowledged that he couldn't return the money if clients asked for it. This was a complete admission of fraud, written out clearly for anyone to read. I immediately forwarded it to Detective Gaines with the subject line, "Full confession." Then I called him. When he answered, I could barely contain my excitement. "Did you see his latest email?" Detective Gaines was already reading it. "Yes, this is incredible. He's documented everything. The total amount stolen, the number of victims, the use of client funds for personal expenses, the inability to return the money. This is enough for multiple felony charges." He said he'd immediately get a warrant for Trevor's arrest and would work with the FBI since this crossed state lines. Some of Trevor's clients lived in neighboring states. He'd also start the process of freezing any assets in Kaufman Wealth Management's business accounts. I asked about recovering the money. Detective Gaines was more optimistic now. If $800,000 was still in business accounts, that could be recovered and distributed to victims. It wouldn't be everything, but it was better than nothing. He thanked me for the investigative work and said most victims never managed to get this kind of documentary evidence. Within 24 hours, Detective Gaines called to tell me they'd located Trevor. He was still in the city, staying at an extended stay hotel. They'd arrested him that morning and charged him with 23 counts of wire fraud, theft, and operating as an unlicensed financial advisor. The district attorney was building a case that could result in 15 to 20 years in prison. They'd also frozen the Kaufman Wealth Management business account, which held $847,000. That money would be held pending trial and eventually distributed to victims. Additionally, they'd found evidence that Trevor owned a house in his name worth approximately $400,000. That could also be seized and liquidated to pay restitution. Detective Gaines asked if I'd be willing to testify at trial. "Absolutely," I said. I wanted to look Trevor in the face while I explained how he'd stolen my grandmother's inheritance and how his own emails had been his downfall. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, I coordinated with other victims. Through Detective Gaines, I got contact information for 12 of Trevor's other clients, all of whom had similar stories. We created a group chat and shared information. The amounts varied. Some people had given Trevor $50,000, others over $300,000, but the pattern was identical. Fake statements, promises of growth, steady theft over years. We all filed civil claims against Trevor's estate to ensure we'd receive portions of any recovered assets. I also hired a lawyer, Amanda Cross, who specialized in investment fraud recovery. She charged $350 per hour, but assured me she could maximize my restitution through the criminal case and potentially pursue civil remedies if needed. Amanda reviewed all my documentation, the fake statements, the emails from Rachel, Trevor's admissions, and told me I had one of the strongest cases she'd seen. Trevor's own words would destroy him in court. She also helped me file a complaint with the SEC and FINRA, documenting Trevor's operation of an unlicensed investment business. Even if the criminal case somehow fell apart, the regulatory agencies would ensure Trevor could never work in finance again. The preliminary hearing was in late May. I attended with 11 other victims. We sat in the courtroom and watched Trevor, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, shuffle in with his public defender. He looked smaller than I remembered, defeated. He didn't make eye contact with any of us. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Huang, presented the evidence. She displayed Trevor's emails on a screen, the ones where he'd admitted to stealing $2.4 million and using client funds for personal expenses. She showed the judge our statements versus the actual brokerage records, demonstrating the systematic fraud. She presented testimony from Detective Gaines about how the investigation unfolded. The judge barely needed 10 minutes to decide there was sufficient evidence for trial. He set the trial date for September and increased Trevor's bail to $500,000. Trevor's public defender asked for reduced bail, citing his cooperation and lack of flight risk. Jennifer Huang argued that Trevor had already demonstrated flight risk by closing his office and disappearing when clients started asking questions. The judge agreed and kept bail at $500,000. Trevor couldn't afford it. He remained in custody. After the hearing, Jennifer pulled me aside. She wanted to discuss my emails to Trevor pretending to be a lawyer. Some defense attorneys might try to argue entrapment or that the evidence was obtained improperly. But she'd consulted with legal experts and felt confident the emails were admissible. Trevor had voluntarily sent them to someone he believed was a lawyer, and nothing I'd said constituted coercion or threatened him. She said my emails would likely be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case because they documented intent and knowledge in Trevor's own words. Over the summer, I worked with Amanda and Detective Gaines to build a comprehensive victim impact statement. I documented not just the financial loss, but the emotional impact, the betrayal of trust, the violation of my grandmother's memory, the years I'd believed I was building financial security when really I was being robbed. The stress and anxiety of discovering the truth, the time and money spent on lawyers and investigations. Amanda assured me these details mattered for sentencing. The trial began on a Wednesday in September. The courtroom was packed with victims and their families. Trevor's public defender tried to argue that Trevor had made bad investment decisions but hadn't intended to defraud anyone. He claimed the losses were due to legitimate market volatility and poor judgment, not criminal intent. Jennifer systematically destroyed that argument. She presented the emails where Trevor admitted to fabricating statements. She showed how client money had been deposited into Trevor's business account and then transferred to his personal account for expenses like his mortgage, car payments, and vacations to Hawaii. She demonstrated that Trevor had never made any actual investments with client money. He'd simply spent it while creating fake statements to cover his tracks. She called Detective Gaines to testify about the investigation. She called several victims, including me and Liz, to describe how Trevor had cultivated trust and exploited it. And then she displayed the emails. All of them. Projected on a large screen for the jury to read. Trevor's admission that he'd managed $3.2 million but only had $800,000 remaining. His confession that he'd used client funds for personal expenses. His acknowledgement that he couldn't return money if clients demanded withdrawals. His statement that he'd operated through a proprietary system to hide the truth from unsophisticated clients. The emails were devastating. I watched the jury read them, saw their expressions change from skeptical to shocked to angry. Trevor's public defender tried to object, claiming the emails were obtained through deception, but the judge overruled. Trevor had sent them voluntarily to someone offering legal services. No coercion, no threats, just his own words documenting his own crimes. The trial lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, the jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all 23 counts. Trevor's face went white. Several victims in the courtroom cried. I sat perfectly still, feeling validation wash over me. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Trevor remained in custody. At sentencing, the judge heard victim impact statements. 12 of us stood up one by one and described what Trevor had stolen. Not just money, but security, trust, future plans. Liz talked about her lost retirement savings. An older couple described how Trevor had taken the money they'd saved to help their daughter with medical bills. A single mother explained how she'd given Trevor her settlement from a car accident, money meant to secure her children's future. When it was my turn, I spoke directly to Trevor. Told him about my grandmother working as a teacher for 40 years, saving carefully, investing wisely, leaving me an inheritance because she loved me. Told him how he'd stolen that gift and tried to steal my future with it. Told him how his own arrogance and ego had been his downfall, because he couldn't resist explaining his scheme to someone he thought was a lawyer who'd help him escape justice. I said I hoped he spent every day in prison thinking about how his own written words had destroyed him. The judge sentenced Trevor to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 12 years. He also ordered full restitution to all victims and permanent prohibition from working in financial services. Trevor's house was sold, and the proceeds combined with the frozen business accounts totaled $1.2 million, which was distributed proportionally to victims. I received $68,000 of my $200,000 back. Not everything, but something. Amanda helped me file additional civil claims against Trevor's retirement accounts and future earnings, which meant any money he made after prison would be garnished until full restitution was paid. The case got significant media attention. Local news covered the trial, focusing on how a sophisticated scam had operated for years and how victims had helped bring down the scammer by documenting his own admissions. A reporter interviewed me about the fake lawyer emails, and I explained that sometimes you have to think strategically about evidence collection. You have to give scammers rope and let them hang themselves with their own words. The segment aired on the local evening news and went viral online. I received messages from other fraud victims asking for advice. Several law firms contacted me about consulting on evidence gathering in financial fraud cases. I even got an email from the FBI asking if I'd be willing to speak about my experience at a conference on white-collar crime investigation techniques. A year later, I'd rebuilt my savings to $95,000 through aggressive budgeting and the restitution payments. Not where I'd been, but better than I'd feared after discovering the fraud. More importantly, Trevor was in prison, and 23 other victims had received some portion of their money back because of the evidence we'd gathered. Amanda told me she'd used the strategy from my case, getting perpetrators to document their own schemes by creating fake personas offering help, in 3 other cases. 2 had resulted in confessions similar to Trevor's. The technique worked because con artists believed they were smarter than everyone else. They couldn't resist explaining their cleverness, even when that explanation became the evidence that destroyed them. Sometimes justice came from fighting back. Sometimes it came from being smarter than the person trying to scam you. And sometimes it came from giving someone just enough rope to write their own confession in emails they thought would save them. Trevor had thought he was manipulating a lawyer who could make his problems disappear. Instead, he'd been manipulating himself, writing the evidence that put him in prison for 18 years. Every victim who'd received restitution had those emails to thank. Every year Trevor spent behind bars was a year earned by his own documented admissions. He'd asked if I could help him escape justice, Instead, he'd helped me serve it. That was all the revenge I needed. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.